What's up guys, I'm Oscar Zulu. I'm a music producer out of Maryland, and I've been blessed enough to be a part of some really cool albums. Today I want to break down my sample, Laugh to Keep From Crying, from the Square One Music Library Volume 10. So I started this idea the way that I start most of my ideas, and that's by figuring out my chord progression. In this case, I knew that I already wanted to make a vintage soul sounding sample, so I loaded up the upright piano from Simple Sam samples and laid down this progression. This is a really simple chord progression. In the key of C minor, it's a 1-4-5 repeated 3 times, and then closing out on a 1-7. I already knew that I wanted to have a repeating section and then have a big turnaround at the end, so I started developing that idea here. To make the piano sound a little bit more authentic and vintage, I first made it mono using a directional mixer. I added an isotope vinyl to it to give it a little bit of character and tone, and then I panned it hard right. The next thing I wanted to add was a bass line, so I opened up the Rickenbacker bass and laid down a bass line following the root notes of the chords. As you can hear, I added a lot of extra notes in there, some walk-ups, some embellishments, and then a little bit of rhythm at the end just to add some more interest to this sample. Next, I opened up an acoustic drum kit called Tempo from Teletone Audio and came up with a groove that matched the bass line. I almost always prefer to play in a drum part rather than pulling in an already existing drum break, and this just ensures that I'm able to really match the vibe of what I'm working on. I don't know that I would have been able to find a break that does what I needed it to do, especially for this turnaround section. Next, I added a string section from East West Opus. The main portion of the strings are just following the chords laid out by the piano, but there is a top line playing a little bit of a simple melody, something similar to what you might hear in an authentic 70s song. And then again at that turnaround, we have the strings changing up a little bit, playing a little bit of a different melody. You can also hear that quick string run up at the very end, and that helps add some more realism before that transition. The effects chain that I have on the strings starts with a directional mixer, making it mono. That goes into a good Hertz lossy, which just degrades the sample a little bit. That feeds into an EQ where I'm rolling off a little bit of that high end, and that goes back into the vinyl. This effects chain is what I ended up putting on most of the instruments that come after this point. So I was pretty happy with the way that this was coming along, but I felt that the big build-up section could use a little brass. So again, I opened up East West Opus, this time using a brass preset, and I just basically followed what the bass was playing. So I was basically done with the instrumentation, but I felt like it definitely needed some vocals to give it that authentic feel. So one thing that I haven't mentioned up to this point is that this entire project was being done with Verispeed on. Verispeed basically allows you to treat your DAW like a tape machine or record player. If you just increase or decrease this one value, it will change the pitch and the speed of your entire project. One of the main ways that I like to use Verispeed is by slowing the project down so I can sing at a slower tempo and have a little bit more control over my voice. Then afterwards I speed it back up and it kind of gives me that chipmunk soul sound. You can also hear this done a lot on albums like Igor and Blonde. I knew when I started this project that this was a technique that I wanted to use, so I started off writing at a much slower tempo so that I could speed it up later. So here's the vocal line that I came up with. And with Verispeed turned off, this was the pitch that I originally sang it at. The vocal chain here is pretty long. It starts with my mic, just a Shure SM58. That runs directly into my Apollo Twin. The first thing that I do within Logic is pitch correction, and for that I just use Logic's built-in flex pitch. As for the effects chain, it starts off with a 1073 preamp emulation, then into an EQ getting rid of some of the lows, an LA2A for some compression, a de-esser to get rid of any of the harsh S's, a little alter voice so I can shift the formant up a little bit, make it sound a little bit more like a female vocal, then a Waves Abbey Road Chambers, another vinyl, and then to one last EQ to get rid of a little bit more lows and boost the highs a little bit. To add a little bit more depth to my vocals, I added the Hollywood backup singers from East West, and they're just singing the same notes in some of the same places where you can hear my vocals. The last thing I did within Logic was to send all of the instruments to the same bus, and on that bus I have a vintage preamp emulation and a vintage compressor. I really like to do this when I'm trying to make authentic sounding samples. I think it mimics what artists would have had to do in the studios back in the 70s when they had to run everything through hardware. It also just adds a little bit of tone and character at the very end when everything comes together. To try to take the authenticity even another step further, I stemmed out all the instruments so that they play individually. I ran that out of the computer through a reamp box into my tape machine where I recorded it on cassette tape. I then recorded that back into the computer and put all the pieces back together. After that, the sample was finished, but I wanted to actually use it as a sample, and I flipped it into an entirely different idea. Here's what that sounds like. The breakdown video for that sample is now available over on my Patreon. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you learned something.